hope to start in 1 minute. Please do another sweep of the hall. Hello everybody, and welcome back. I assume everybody had a great lunch. I know I did. Amazing. Our next talk, I Know What I Want, Motivation and Successful Aging, led by Director and Professor and Canada Research Chair in Cognitive Aging, Julia Spagnol, will discuss current studies about age differences in curiosity and the benefits of curiosity for cognition and well-being. There will also be a discussion on the connections between helping others and cognition and well-being. Julia Spagnol received her doctorate in cognitive psychology at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She completed postdoctoral work at Duke University Medical Center and the Rotman Research Institute at Baycrest in Toronto before joining the Department of Psychology at TMU in 2007. Julia received an Early Researcher Award from the Ontario Ministry of Research and Innovation, 2014 to 2019, and has held the Canada Research Chair in Cognitive Aging since 2014. Julia recently served as Interim Associate Dean, Research and Graduate Studies in the Faculty of Arts at TMU. She is also the current undergraduate thesis coordinator in the Department of Psychology. Wow, those are great credentials. Here she is, Julia Spagnol.
Hi everybody, can you hear me? Great. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I'm very excited to be here. It's actually been a few years since I've gotten to present at the 50 Plus Festival. I think it was definitely pre-pandemic, so it feels like it was a different era. So I'm very excited to be here, and not only by myself, but also I will be joined by two lovely graduate students who I think I have, yep, there they are. They're also sitting right here, and they will get their individual introductions, official introductions, when it's their time to speak. So what we did today is we actually chopped up our presentation into 3 parts. Partly because that makes it a little bit more dynamic and makes it less boring for you, I hope. You'll have 3 different speakers and different, slightly different cadence and so on. You'll also maybe get a slightly different perspective because they are graduate students and they see the world through a different lens than their professor, right? And we prepared some things that we thought you might be interested in learning about, but there will be time for questions at the end. And I think we'll have a way to take your questions where somebody comes to you with the mic so that the others can hear, and then I will repeat the question for those attending remotely so that they can also hear the question. But that'll be probably more towards the end of the hour, so I'll get started with some introductory remarks, and then actually Mene and Megan will kind of get to the meat of the matter, really. So the topics of curiosity and prosociality, or being nice to other people. I also want to just say a little bit more about our group, because 2 graduate students are here, but our group is bigger than that. It's bigger than what you see on this photo, actually. This is just a recent photo that I happen to have. So we're called the Memory and Decision Processes Lab, and we're located in the Department of Psychology here at TMU. And we are dedicated to research. I have a little blurb here. Research on cognitive aging, right? Which always sounds a bit, yeah, cognitive aging, is that going to be all about all the things that don't work as well as they used to? No, the answer is we focus on areas of aging and lifespan development that reveal strengths as well as weaknesses, right? So there's always a balance. And we're trying to sort of suss out what are the emerging strengths as we get older, and what can we sort of take advantage of as we age? What are those superpowers? And so we look at how motivation and emotion play into cognition, what we remember, what we attend to, how we make decisions, and so forth. And we're finding some really, really interesting age differences in that interplay between motivation, emotion, and cognition. And we're very lucky to have funding from various federal sources, as well as from the province of Ontario. So this is a really simple graph, and you've probably seen versions of this before. It's a straight line. It goes up. What is it? Well, on the lower axis, you have the year that people were born, starting about 100 years ago in Canada. And then on the y-axis, you have their life expectancy. So this is straight from Statistics Canada. I did not make this up. It's a very compelling graph, right? Life expectancy just continues to climb and climb and climb, which is great news for all of us who want to live a long and fulfilling life. But it also means that there are a lot of new challenges that our society simply wasn't facing before we started to live so darn long, right? So this poses some really interesting scientific challenges, as well as practical challenges for the people, for all of us, really, who are benefiting from this trend. So what we do when we bring research participants into the lab, so onto campus, is we typically try to understand age differences rather than the aging process itself. To understand the aging process, you have to stick with the same people year after year after year and do what we call longitudinal studies. We don't have time for that, unfortunately, with rare exceptions. It would take 20 years to get the results of a single study, or longer. So instead, what we do is we bring members of different birth cohorts, like Gen Z and boomers, for example, into the lab, and we're aware that they are extremely different on a lot of levels, right? I'm sure you know some younger people, your own children, grandchildren, kids of friends, what have you, your neighbors, people you bump into on the TTC. It's like they're from a different planet with their technology, with their way of expressing themselves, the way they move around, the way they carry their bodies. You can't even, it's like a different species. So how do we go about comparing younger and older people? We try to do the best we can, but we realize that whenever we think we've pinned something down about age differences in the things that we study, so emotion, motivation, cognition, it might have to do with a host of factors. It might not just be because of the age difference. It could also be because of generational differences that are confounded with age. So this is sort of the Achilles heel of our approach. But we're very aware of it. We talk about it a lot amongst ourselves. What do we know from years and years of, not just in our lab or in my colleague's lab, what do we know from this research tradition? Well, I'll save you the suspense. One major finding that is confirmed over and over again is that when it comes to what we call fluid cognition, things like being really speedy, being, absorbing lots of new information and being able to spit it back out, or doing a lot of things simultaneously, multitasking, younger adults win. Good for them. They're really good at that. They are world champions at fluid cognition. Older adults are world champions at another cognitive domain, and that is crystallized cognition or world knowledge, or we also sometimes, we have lots of jargon in psychology, so we also like to call it semantic cognition. So it's all the knowledge that you accumulate over your lifespan, everything that you know, the vocabulary that you have, everything you know about math, everything you know about the tax code, everything you know about everybody you ever met. All of this, you can think of it as a giant library of knowledge that you actually continue to build onto basically until the end of your lifespan. And it's an incredible wealth of information that older adults always beat the younger adults on. So we give a test of general knowledge. We already know what we're going to find. The older adults will do so much better than the younger adults. This is probably too small to see, but I just wanted to show you this complicated schematic that shows these different colored circles that represent different realms or domains that we think of as interconnected when it comes to the aging process. So aging is in the middle, then we have cognition, which I've been talking about. On the right-hand side, there are some domains, again, in which older adults are less strong than younger adults, but also vice versa. Then we see these brain, in the cool colors, we see brain variables, so brain structure, brain vasculature, brain function. Everything has to do with the brain, and of course makes sense because cognition depends on the brain. And then on the green side, we have a bunch of quote-unquote other factors. And what do we have there? Education, life experience, nutrition, exercise, lifestyle factors, also genetics, right, which plays a pretty big factor, actually, in all of these outcomes. Okay, so what is missing in this picture? I'm not going to put anyone on the spot, but there is something that is really missing. It's the agency of the individual person who is getting older. It's what do they actually want? We're all agents, actors, if you will, in our own lifespan development. It's not like everything is just happening to us. We're also making lots of choices. And those choices can be very consequential, right? It's sort of obvious when you think about exercise. Exercise is going to be good for your body. It's going to be good for your brain. This, in turn, will influence how you age cognitively and emotionally and so on. That's a choice, though, that you get to make or not make. So what about what people want? One way to think about how different younger and older adults are and what they want, what they're focused on, what their priorities are, is to simply ask them, why are they participating in research studies? These are some of the answers that the younger adults give us. I need the credit, or I need the money, and also I want to get out of here as quickly as I can. And we give them a debriefing form afterwards. They don't even look at it. It's in the trash bin as soon as they're out of the room. And granted, older adults it's not as if they're not interested in the payment, right? They would like to be compensated for their participation, as they should. However, they'll also express, often without being asked, sentiments like these. I'm interested, I get something out of this. I want to see if I can still do it. Then we tell them, this is not a competition and you're fine. And we're also not diagnosing anything. But also lots of people tell us that they want to support science and that they think this is really important for society. And that's exciting for us to hear because we have to sort of sustain ourselves and our hard work over years. Sometimes there's not very much reward. So it's nice to hear from participants that they think what we do is important. In other words, we see this increase in intrinsic motivation as people get older, or in older versus younger adults. Younger adults often are very extrinsically motivated. They really respond to the carrots and the sticks kind of thing. And older adults are also extrinsically motivated. I don't want to paint this overly rosy picture, but we see this increase in intrinsic motivational orientation, I guess, in older participants. You might now be thinking, well, these are just the people who volunteer to be in research studies. This is a selection bias. There is probably some truth to that. It's very difficult to completely kind of get a handle on that. But we also see it in other types of data that we can collect that don't involve coming to the lab. So for example, in online studies, So we think there's something more general to this. So I've been using the word motivation very liberally, like everybody knows what it is, and we do know what it is. Sometimes we feel motivated, sometimes not so much. Psychologists think of it as a state. We can also think of it as a trait, and actually Megan will tell us more about that distinction. But really, in the most narrow sense, it is a state that you're in at the moment. You're feeling motivated, you're feeling energized, or not. And it's goal-oriented. So you're not just having feelings of happiness or sadness, but that affective state has a direction, it has a goal. You want to achieve something or avoid something. And the effects of being motivated can be broken down into selection, effort, and performance. Selection means that you're not going to engage with everything that comes your way. You're going to select specifically what is relevant to your goal. So if your goal is to become fit or to learn a new language, you're not going to be distracted by other opportunities to do other things. Younger adults are less selective than older adults. And that makes a lot of adaptive, sort of evolutionary sense. Younger adults should be open to lots of things that are going on because they might just happen upon something that becomes then a lifelong passion. For older adults, they know themselves. They have that massive semantic memory that they can draw on, their world knowledge, their self-knowledge as well, so they can be more selective. And then, of course, effort and performance are also related to motivation. In the title of our talk, I had the word successful aging. And it's a very good question, like, what is that even, how do you define successful aging? And there's actually a lot of debate about this in our field, and a lot of researchers are not happy with the existing definitions. And here's one that I kind of like from the World Health Organization. It says, healthy aging or successful aging refers to the attributes that enable people to be and to do what they have reason to value. So having a reason to value something means that motivation plays a role, goals, priorities, what you care about, in other words, what you want. And notice how there's nothing here about specific benchmarks. Healthy aging is when you can still run around the block, or healthy aging is when none of that. This is all relative to the person's own goals or what they have reason to value. And this is an important reminder, too, that what person A finds important may not be the same as what person B finds important. And so we might have differences between people, we might have differences between cultures. Collectivist cultures might have different ideas of what healthy or successful aging is compared to individualist cultures like ours here in Canada. Sex, gender, race, ethnicity may also play into this. So this is always important to keep in mind, and I think some of the presentations later today will actually focus in on these individual factors a little bit more. So in the remainder of our hour today, we'll focus on intrinsic motivation, which this term I've already used, right, as like the kind of motivation that older adults have more of. And we'll break it down into two flavors. One is curiosity, the wanting to know things. And the other is prosociality, or wanting to do things for other people. And then for each of those, we'll say a little bit about research methods and findings, what those findings mean, practically speaking, and also what they might mean not only for the individual, but for society at large. So I'm going to now hand this over to Elizabeth, who will introduce the next speaker, Megan Vaziri.
Thank you, Julia. Up next is Megan Vaziri, an MA student in the clinical psychology stream of the graduate program. She completed her BSc in life sciences with a specialist in psychology and a major in French language learning at the University of Toronto in 2022. In the year following graduation, Megan worked as a clinical research assistant in the Neuropsychology Research Lab at Toronto Western Hospital. Megan's MA research will investigate the influence of social value on curiosity and memory. Her other research interests include investigating episodic memory in those with neurological disorders and the aging population. Come on up, Megan.
everybody. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. My name is Megan Vaziri, and I'm going to be discussing curiosity and lifelong learning with you today. I want to start us off with a fun little exercise. So I'll ask you to take a look at the screen and think to yourself, or maybe even say out loud if you know the answer, what is the name of this fish? Okay. Thank you, everyone. These are some great answers. I'm now going to ask you to think about how curious you are to know the answer to this question. Maybe think about this on a scale from 0 to 6, where 0 is that you're not at all curious to know the answer, and 6 is that you're very curious to know the answer. So where on this scale do you feel that you fall? From 0 to 6 or somewhere in between? So maybe we can think about this to ourselves for a few moments. Some very curious people here today. I love to see that. Okay, thank you, everybody. So everyone's very curious from what I'm hearing to know the answer to this question. So our answer is, this is called the ocean sunfish. And you might be wondering why I had you do this exercise right now. But unfortunately, I'll have to keep you waiting just a little bit longer until later in our talk to know about why. That being said, I want to get into the content of this talk right now by giving you a brief definition of curiosity. There are many ways that we describe curiosity, but generally research agree upon this one definition, that curiosity is a motivational state that drives us to acquire or learn new knowledge. As Julia alluded to earlier, there are many types of curiosity, but the two that I'm going to be focusing on in this talk today are trait and state curiosity. Trait curiosity can be defined as a stable part of someone's personality. So what does this look like? So perhaps you're an individual who is curious about a lot of things and has been curious all of their life. In this case, you might say that someone is high in trait level curiosity, or they're curious as a part of their personality. On the other hand, state curiosity is more of this in-the-moment type of curiosity. It's a temporary motivational state that we often elicit in people. So unlike trait curiosity, this is more of a temporary in-the-moment type of feeling. We can further differentiate between trait and state curiosity in terms of how we measure them in research. Trait curiosity is often measured using questionnaires, especially in our lab, where we will provide individuals with long sheets of statements, and we'll ask them to rate how applicable each of these statements is to their lives. For example, we might have them use a scale of 1, not at all applicable, or almost never applicable, or to 4, being almost always applicable. And there's, of course, that intermediate lining between 1 and 4 as well. Then we'll have them read these statements. There's a few examples above, such as, I enjoy exploring new ideas. I find it fascinating to learn new information. I enjoy discussing abstract concepts. I brood for a long time in an attempt to solve some fundamental problem, and difficult conceptual problems can keep me awake all night thinking about solutions. Then we'll have these individuals write 1 to 4 based on how they feel this is applicable to them. And this is how we assess trait curiosity, with higher scores across these items, meaning they're higher in this level of personality level curiosity. On the other hand, state curiosity, like I mentioned, is something that we try to elicit in the moment. So we don't use questionnaires like we do for trait curiosity for this construct. Instead, what we might do a lot of the time is we use trivia questions, because many people are curious about trivia questions. And we might show them a question such as, why do your eyelids get puffy after crying? I'm sure not many individuals are curious about this before being presented with the question, but now that I bring it up, I'm sure there are some of you wondering, why does that happen? And so what I've just done is elicited state-level curiosity in some of you. And how we measure this in our participants in the lab is we have them rate on a scale, for example, 0, not at all curious, to 6, being very curious, about how curious they are to know more about this question. And after showing them one, we'll show them quite a few. And again, the higher level that they rate themselves, the more state curiosity was elicited by that question. So just to give a brief summary, to compare trait to state curiosity, trait is more of a stable personality trait that we assess with questionnaires, whereas state curiosity is more temporary and in the moment, and we elicit it with these temporary, in the moment type of questions to get people curious and thinking about their answers. Okay, so now we've talked about what curiosity is and the two types, or there are many different types, but the two types that we'll be talking about today. Now I'm thinking that we're wondering, well, what makes us curious? We talked about curiosity or trivia questions a little bit. What else makes us curious? There are quite a few theories proposing ideas about what can make us curious, but there is no right answer. There is scientific evidence supporting many of them. But to get us thinking about these theories and this concept, I have a little activity for us, where I'll ask you to raise your hand about the set of criteria that I mentioned that you feel makes you most curious to know about something. So, for those of you who feel that they would be most curious about new information or information that they've never encountered before, please raise your hand. Okay, quite a bit of individuals. Some good support for this theory. So thank you, everyone. For those of you who feel that you would be most curious about information that you already have a lot of knowledge about, so for example, let's say if you are an expert on birds and someone's offering to tell you information related to birds, do you feel that you would be most curious about this type of information? Okay, good amount. I'm not comparing the two. It doesn't have to be a comparison, but in this case, if you feel that you would be very curious to know about things that you know quite a bit about, I'm just asking you can raise your hand there. It can be both of them, and they're not mutually exclusive. Okay, so there was quite a bit of support for this, so thank you, everyone. And our final condition here is please raise your hand if you feel that you would be most curious about things that you have an intermediate amount of knowledge about. Okay, there's quite a bit of hands for this one. And what this might look like, just to give some context to it, is that now everyone here knows a bit about curiosity. Maybe we have some curiosity experts here, and maybe we'll have some at the end of this talk. But at this level, you'll probably have an intermediate amount of knowledge about curiosity. So thank you, everyone, for participating. It seems we've got quite a bit of support for each one of these different kind of contexts and criteria. And these actually reflect real theories about what makes us curious. Some people suggest that we are most curious about new information. Some say that we're most curious about information that we already know a lot about. And still, there are others who think that we are most curious about items that we have an intermediate amount of knowledge about. And like I mentioned before, there is support for each one of these theories, and so there is no real right answer. All of them can be correct. Okay. So now that we understand what makes us curious, we're now going to discuss what happens in the brain when we are curious. On the left side of this image, or image A, you will see the dopaminergic system, which is a communication pathway that is linked to reward. On the right side of this image, or image B, we see the noradrenergic, or also known as the norepinephrine system, and this is tied to arousal and alertness. Interestingly, both of these systems are involved in our curiosity across the lifespan. Regarding the dopaminergic system, research finds that when we see new information, which is tied to curiosity, this novelty seeking, several reward-related brain regions are activated. These are known as, for example, the nucleus accumbens, which is not pictured in this diagram, the ventral tegmental area, or VTA, which can be seen on the left, and as well as another, the substantia nigra, which is SN on the diagram. The idea that these regions are activated when we are experiencing curiosity is also supported by studies that find that people who tend to explore new information more often, possibly engaging in more curiosity, actually experience greater activation of these regions than individuals who are not seeking new information more often, or perhaps are less curious. There's also more direct testing of curiosities linked to these brain regions and their activation, which had individuals read trivia questions, which we discussed before as a way to elicit state curiosity, and they also had them undergo a simultaneous magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI. And what they found was that the trivia questions that had people in a higher level of state curiosity actually found greater activation in these areas. So again, this is another link between curiosity and activation in these regions. Now I'm going to direct us back to the right side of this image, or image B, the noradrenergic system. A lot of the focus on researching curiosity and brain regions has been focused on the dopaminergic system, but increasing evidence is accumulating to suggest that this system is also involved in curiosity. Particularly, research is suggesting that a region called the locus ceruleus, or the LC in that diagram, is responsible for some aspects of curiosity. So for example, there was a recent neuroimaging study that came out to find the LC is involved in processing uncertainty, which is associated with curiosity, as it's information that we don't quite have yet. There was also another study that looked at pupil dilation, which is a way that we can actually measure LC activity. And this study found that changes in dilation due to uncertainty is actually associated with better learning rates. So what this means is that the LC is associated possibly with curiosity, but also with learning as well. Interestingly, in both of these two systems, we see connections to the hippocampus, which is labeled as HIP in the diagrams there. And this is a region that is responsible for memory functioning. This region has receptors for both dopamine and noradrenaline, and so when curiosity is arriving in our systems, or when we're feeling curious, these receptors for dopamine are activated in the hippocampus, and which could provide additional memory function. And so again, this is really eliciting this connection to memory with curiosity. We also see that the prefrontal cortex here, or the PFC, is in both of these systems. The PFC is a region that is associated with planning, coordination, and attention, suggesting another link between curiosity and these functions. So now we're going to move on to talking about age differences in curiosity. Research suggests that in older adults, there tends to be lower trait-level curiosity, which we talked about as that stable part of one's personality. However, state-level curiosity is either maintained or can even be improved in older adults compared to younger adults. Now, if we think back to those theories that we discussed about what makes us curious, this might actually make sense. State curiosity at times is elicited when we don't have a lot of, or when we have a lot of prior knowledge about some type of information. As Julia mentioned earlier, older adults tend to have much larger semantic hubs and semantic knowledge about the world as opposed to younger adults. So it is possible that older adults are using their prior knowledge to help them feel more curious about the state level in the moments type of information, which younger adults do not have. This also potentially explains why trait-level curiosity may go down as we age. So for example, if we have higher amounts of knowledge compared to younger adults, perhaps we're not experiencing this type of gnawing uncertainty that is reflected in these trait curiosity items I presented earlier, such as brooding to know the answer to some solution. You might just not be experiencing that with more knowledge as we age. Okay. So it is important that state curiosity is maintained or even improved in older adulthood, given that it offers numerous benefits. One of these benefits is that it improves our emotional health. The reasoning behind this, some suggest that it is because of its ties to dopamine release, and other research finds that it's just associated with positive emotions more generally. And beyond the research supporting this idea, you can even reflect on the fact that it is difficult to feel both curious and distressed at the same time. So for example, let's say you are at a museum and you're feeling sad, you might have greater difficulty enjoying the museum, or a lot more curiosity is required to be able to enjoy that content. Also, if you're experiencing curiosity, you may have less time to remain in a ruminative or a sad or depressed state. And so it can also help your emotional health in this manner. Another of the benefits of state curiosity is that it improves our physical health. Now, this does have some ties to our emotional health improvements that are related to curiosity, but research does find that individuals who are more curious are better able to cope and manage with distress in difficult situations. So in those experiencing physical ailments, they may be better able to help cope with these situations and, as a result, improve their physical health. There's also research to suggest that greater curiosity, as we heard before, is tied to better emotional health, which can counteract the effects of anxiety, sadness, and anger, which are all linked to compromised immune functioning, which can affect our physical health as well. And finally, one of the important benefits of curiosity is that it improves our cognition, particularly our memory. So at the beginning of this talk, I mentioned that we would come back to our fun little example of the name of this fish. I now want to ask you all again, perhaps to blurt out loud, what is the name of this fish, if you will? Amazing. It seems like everyone here has got the answer that it's the ocean sunfish. So for those of you who remembered, I might ask you by nodding your head yes or shaking your head no, did you rate yourself as high on curiosity to know the answer of this question at the beginning? Yes, so I'm seeing a lot of nods. And so this is an excellent example of how curiosity boosts our memory. In our lab, we're finding that greater curiosity helps us to remember information later on, just like we saw right now. There's also ongoing research to find that this memory effect is more pronounced in older adults than younger adults. With research finding, for example, when we run our studies, that older adults are more responsive and they're more engaged in these materials as opposed to younger adults who might not be as responsive to this information or engaged. And so with older adults spending more time learning about and being interested in this information, they're actually able to learn more, and we see this pronounced effect in this age group. And so what this is all to say is that it is important to cultivate curiosity in our day-to-day lives. And before we wrap up this talk today, I want to just give us an overview of what we discussed, hit on some main points that we talked about. So curiosity, we discussed, is it's a motivational state in which it drives us to acquire new knowledge and new information. We also learned about how trait curiosity tends to go down in older adulthood, but this is okay because state curiosity is maintained or can even improve. And this is tied to numerous benefits, such as to our emotional, our physical, and our cognitive health. And like I mentioned just before, that this is the reason why it's so important to foster curiosity in our day-to-day lives and in our societies. Ways that this can be done, let's say in the educational system, is encouraging individuals to be open to asking questions and to pursuing their interests and passions as opposed to simply what we tell them to learn, what we tell them they should study. In older adulthood, this can look like giving individuals the opportunity to pursue their interests and passions and to be open and ask these questions, such as by attending talks like this today, which all of you did to foster your curiosity. So my take-home message today is to continue fostering your curiosity as it's key to making our memories sharp, to benefiting our emotional and our physical health. So thank you all today for attending.
Appreciate that. Okay, so next up is Manae Kare-Kubian. She's an MA student in the clinical psychology stream of the graduate program. She completed her BA in psychology with a minor in fine arts at the University of Waterloo and spent her postdoc baccalaureate year working as a lab manager in the Wisdom and Culture Lab at Waterloo. Manae's MA research examines effective influences on judgment and decision-making in younger and older adults, with a particular emphasis on hindsight bias in the lab and in the world. Manae is also involved in a longitudinal study of pro-sociality. That's a new word for me. So please, Manae, come on up.
Hi, everyone. Today, my talk is going to center around the question of whether prosociality is a superpower as we age. And I want to begin by telling you about a woman that I know from the Armenian community. Her name is Margot, and she's maybe in her late 60s, early 70s. Margot is at the community center every single Saturday and every single Sunday. She does absolutely everything, ranging from helping out the Saturday school teachers, running church events, organizing charity events, organizing bake sales, setting up, taking down, anything you can think of. Whenever we need something, she's one of our first go-to people. We go directly to Margot. Margot has 3 children of her own, and she also has 5 grandkids, and she's not in an amazing health condition. But despite everything going on in her life, she shows up every day, or at least 2 days a week, and she does something good for others. In other words, Margot is a highly pro-social individual. Prosociality, in the research context, is a broad term that encompasses motivational, cognitive, social, and behavioral processes that center around the welfare of other people. And we're going to come to learn that this is extremely important both for social bonds and also for society at large. There's a whole bunch of concepts that relate to prosociality. So things like volunteering, mentoring, helping, donating, even showing up to vote, but also things like trust and empathy, cooperation, and altruism. All of these fall under that umbrella term of prosociality. So how can we possibly know that prosociality would be a superpower as we age? That's because we have ways of measuring that. Researchers use a whole bunch of research methods, things like questionnaires and behavioral paradigms, longitudinal studies, neuroimaging. I'll tell you a little bit about some of the questionnaires that we have. So essentially participants would get a list of items that they might rate their agreement with. Things like, I try to help others, even if they do not help me. I enjoy doing things for others. So they might rate this on a scale of 1, strongly disagree, all the way to 5, strongly agree. Questionnaires are fantastic for tapping into people's subjective experiences. So their own account of how they perceive the world, how they interact with the world. But unfortunately, there's limitations to all research methods, and one of the limitations here is that participants might be susceptible to social desirability bias, trying to present themselves more favorably, or they might just have a more favorable account of how things are. They're not trying to deceive, their memory is just telling things were better than they are. So what we can do in this case is supplement this information with behavioral paradigms. And researchers create laboratory analogs of conditions that we might engage with out in the world and observe what might happen. So in a subdiscipline called behavioral economics, researchers have developed all sorts of little games, and one of these games is called the dictator game. And we can use games to tap into our constructs of interest. It's called the dictator game because one person who is the dictator gets to decide what to do with the sum of money that they have. And we're going to play that game very briefly, and I'm going to explain the rules as we go. Who's going to be our dictator? Okay. All right. Let's say Julia has given you a hypothetical, we don't have it, $10. You are partnered with someone else in another lecture hall right now. You get to decide what to do with the $10. You can split it any way you want. You can keep $10, you can give $0, you can keep $5, you can give $5, you can keep 2, give 8, give 9, keep 1. Any way you want to split it, you're the dictator. What do you want to do with it? Yes. 50-50, okay. So our participant has chosen to keep $5 and give $5. That is a very fair split, but I'll note here that she did not have to do that. Like they are the dictator, now nothing is stopping them from keeping $10. So this is an awesome way of being able to gauge prosociality. But what if our participant split the money because they're in a lot of pressure right now, being observed by others? Or what if we had someone keep $10 and allocate $0? Is that because they're not pro-social? Or is it because they could really use that money? Or what if someone decided to give $10 and keep $0? Again, not because they're pro-social, but because they want to look good and they're under a lot of pressure. So again, we're seeing that despite the strengths of some research methods, there's also going to be limitations. And what researchers can do is administer a variety of methods and use this combined approach to get more reliable results and be more confident in the phenomenon that they're observing. So we know that older adults are more pro-social because they donate more money to charity. So in 2017, older adults donated almost twice as much as their younger peers at $6.9 billion compared to $3.5. Granted, this might be because older adults have that much more money to be able to donate to charity. However, we also know that older adults donate more of their time. They volunteer more. And this is a chart from the 2021 Canadian Census data. And it shows us that older adults, on average, volunteer more hours per year compared to any other cohort. But again, this might be because older adults do have that much more spare time and they're able to volunteer more. But we keep coming back to this question and looking at it from different angles. So researchers have conducted a range of empirical studies focused on this trend. In one study, the researchers recruited participants and they split them up into 5 different groups. So they were incentivized to walk. Participants could either earn money for themselves, they could earn money for a loved one, they could earn money for charity, they could choose who to earn money for, and there was also a no incentive condition. What the researchers found here is that all incentivized participants walked more. On average, they were walking about 2,500 more steps, which is about 1 mile, and I believe that's around 1.6 kilometers. But they also saw that when given the choice, older adults were more likely to opt to walk for charity, to donate their money to charity, compared to younger adults. And after incentives were removed, older adults were more likely to maintain their step count, whereas younger adults reverted back to their baseline levels. So what this study shows us is that it's easier to incentivize older adults to do pro-social things. Another study looked at learning, and participants were assigned to one of 2 conditions. They could either engage in a learning task to earn points for themselves, or they could engage in a learning task to earn points for another individual. And at the end of the study, those points were converted to a monetary reward. And what the researchers found in this case is that while self-relevant learning declined with age, so participants were performing more poorly when they were learning to get points for themselves, pro-social learning remained intact, so it didn't matter how old a participant was. They were able to maintain that skill. The researchers had also administered a measure of psychopathy, and I don't mean psychopathy as in the sense of a serial killer, but more like traits like reduced empathy and higher disagreeableness. So the researchers suggested that the preservation of this pro-social learning might be linked to decreased psychopathic traits in older adults, which allows them to engage in more pro-social things. You might remember this picture from Mega's presentation. What we've also found in neuroimaging studies is that the brain lights up in reward-sensitive regions when we observe other people get reward. So this idea of vicarious reward. And what this tells us is that prosociality not only has a biological basis, but it's also rewarding in and of itself. We enjoy watching good things happen to other people. One mega study gave participants all sorts of measures. So they were completing questionnaires, tracking their daily habits, they were participating in behavioral paradigms, there was also neuroimaging, and the researchers combined all of these and derived a prosociality metric that they called general benevolence. What they found was that as participants got older, which is what we see on the x-axis, the older participants got, the more generally benevolent they were. So across statistics, across empirical studies, we're seeing that older adults tend to be more pro-social. But why is that? Why do we keep observing this trend? There's a whole bunch of ideas up in the air, things like psychological factors. Like I mentioned earlier, it might be the fact that older adults tend to be lower on psychopathic traits. Maybe it's things like social norms and social roles. What we would expect from a 75-year-old grandfather is not going to be the same as what we expect from an 18-year-old starting undergrad. Maybe it's resources. Maybe older adults really just do have that much more time to be able to volunteer and that much more money to be able to donate. This is exciting for us. Our lab is actually looking at this question. And we launched a longitudinal study in 2021. It's called the Canadian Adulthood and Retirement Study, or CARES for short. And we're following Canadians from all over Canada. And you'll see this little chart here, and it shows where our participants are from. And we're interested in tracking changes in thoughts, beliefs, and activities as it relates to prosociality. And we're going to be following people at 2 years apart for a total of 5 years. Hopefully by the time I graduate, we'll have the data. So far we have data from wave 1. So this is a cross-sectional snapshot of the first time point, which began in 2021. What we found was that prosocial behavior was not related to cognitive factors. So it had nothing to do with fluid or crystallized intelligence, which is something Julia talked about earlier. What we did find, though, was that prosocial behavior was related to economic resources. It was related to prosocial dispositions, and it was also related to social roles. So things like being married or having kids or grandkids. And this makes sense because when you find yourself in that sort of situation, you're just going to have that much more opportunity to engage in doing good. 2 limitations I'll note to this data, one being our sample, the diversity of our sample. Although we did our best, you might have noticed that the majority of our participants were female, the majority of our participants were of European descent, and more than half were educated with a bachelor's degree or more. So if we want to be able to say this is a trend that applies to all people all around the world, the sample would have to reflect that, and that's something future research can target. Another point is that this is a longitudinal study, and so far we only have wave 1 data. It might be that this trend evolves over the years, we don't really know, but you can find out at carestudy.ca, where we will be updating it with our results as they come out. I hope at this point I'm starting to convince you that prosociality matters. It's important for dyads, it's important for families, for communities, and for society at large, but it's also important for the individual. So it's not only about the other, it's also about the self. It's good for things like mental well-being and life satisfaction and physical health, like we saw in that one study where participants were incentivized to walk more. But there's also vulnerabilities that we should recognize. So excessive prosocial behavior, especially in demanding contexts, does present the risk of burnout. I'm sure we all have someone of that sort in our lives who just does too much good for their own good. And also highly prosocial individuals might be more susceptible to getting exploited and to fraud. And we noticed that there's actually a talk centered on cybersecurity and fraud. If that's something you're interested in, it's on Wednesday. I recommend that you check it out. Returning back to the question I started this talk with, is prosociality a superpower as we age? I told you about Margot, who does a lot of good for the Armenian community. So is prosociality in this case a superpower in the sense of being on the streets of downtown and fighting crime? No. But someone like Margot is statistically less likely to be depressed. She's statistically more likely to be satisfied with her life. She's statistically more likely to experience a greater sense of purpose. So in that sense, is prosociality a superpower? I think the answer is absolutely. And that concludes my portion of the talk. If anyone has any questions, oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to pass the mic back to Julia.
We're actually at the end of the hour. Thank you so much for hanging in there with us through all of this curiosity, prosociality, motivation business. While the next speaker sets up, can I suggest that at the same time, if there are any questions, I could take questions? Okay, great. One or two questions, if anybody has one. Yes?
Thanks for the presentation.
Thanks for the presentation. So we get to know the definition of curiosity to motivate us to acquire new knowledge, and then you can express the benefits. So it's kind of a general thinking, kind of existential question. Because of online resources, there's tons of information overload, and there's so much of fake news. So we have to be very careful when we want to be curious to acquire new information. How do we balance this? The positivity and also the negativity, the vulnerability to burnout and to exposure to fraud.
So the first part of the question was about the curiosity and the fact that we're online.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah. I think that in both cases, too much of a good thing, it's possible to overdo it. So I don't know how many of you feel slightly addicted to your smartphones. I know I do, and I know 100% of younger adults are addicted to their smartphones and can't even stand being in a different room from their own smartphone. And there is some of the same neural systems, biological systems, are activated when we're curious to know the answer to a question, as well as when we're feeling like we're jonesing for our phone. It's actually the dopamine system in both cases. So you can have this kind of constant itch to check information on your phone. It's a form of curiosity, but it's not adaptive. We didn't really talk about, the dark side of curiosity. We talked about, the good things. And similarly, being sort of excessively altruistic is problematic as well, right? If you are giving away your last dime, that's not good. That's neither good for you as an individual, nor is it good for society. And there are people who will prey on those who are, by virtue of their age group, or maybe because of cognitive decline that's starting to set in, who are more vulnerable to fraud. And so there are all these schemes that we should all be on the lookout for. Even younger adults should be on the lookout for them. So there is a dark side to it, but I would say overall the benefits far outweigh. And I think, again, what I want to sort of leave you with is that these are strengths as we get older. We're all very used to thinking about, things that maybe, this isn't quite what it used to be. I don't walk as fast. I don't know, whatever it might be. I don't remember new names as well as I once did. If I go to a party and I'm introduced, I don't remember the names afterwards. Yeah, but you have other things that you're doing much more expertly now than you did when you were a younger adult. You're not focusing on those. You take them for granted. I think that probably takes us to the end of the time. So thank you so much for your attention, and I hope you have a fabulous rest of the day.
Thank you, Julia, Megan, and Renee. And now, let us welcome Felicia Yang, Director of the Cognitive Aging Lab, and Mariah Lacombe with their talk, Aging in Marginalized Communities. Are we happy or lonely? Felicia Yang received her doctorate in psychology from the Institute of Psychology, Chinese Academy of Sciences in 2000. She then worked as a postdoc researcher fellow at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development in Berlin, Germany, and later at the University of Toronto. In 2005, 2005, Dr. Yang joined the Department of Psychology at Toronto Metropolitan University. Dr. Yang's research interest covers three related areas: cognitive plasticity of the aging brain, cultural differences in attention and memory, as well as emotion-cognition interaction in aging. Leisha Yang, please come to the stage.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for staying with me and in the late afternoon after the whole day of a talk. Okay, so you might be curious about what I am talking about, and based on the previous talk, and also it's good to learn. Curiosity helps, and so is helping others, right? So my talk will tell you slightly different from what I usually do in my lab, and my lab is Cognitive Aging Lab. And for those of you who already probably met with my students, my crew on the hallway, and they have a table set up. If you didn't have a chance, and make sure you stop by my table on the way out, and they have a lot of information to share with you. So my time is limited, and I will focus on something it's like a side project in my lab, and it's a psychological well-being of older adults in marginalized community with a specific focus on Chinese immigrants, older adults, and see their psychological well-being during the pandemic, and what can we do to promote active aging. So I have Mariah, my PhD student, will join me here and do this presentation together. So it's really great pleasure to be here. Okay, remember I have to do the job. Okay, so my talk, and we'll have 4 different topics. And first, we will talk about impacts of a pandemic, and the second is loneliness and psychological well-being of Chinese older adults. And finally, we will talk about some intervention-related research activities. So with that, and I will have Mariah be here to share with you of the first 2 sections, and I will talk about the second, the last 2 sections. Thank you.
All right, hi everybody. Thank you so much for being with us for this talk. So my name is Mariah Lecomte. I'm a PhD student at Toronto Metropolitan University, and I predominantly work in cognitive aging research. You might have already seen me today. I was working at the booth handing out the free pens. But if you haven't, the table is still there, like Leisha had said. Yeah, so let's talk about the pandemic. And you might be wondering, why are we talking about the pandemic? I mean, World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic in March 2020. It has been 4 years of us talking about this pandemic. So why are we here, and why are we talking about this? Well, one of the reasons is this was a huge, impactful global event. We all experienced a huge, fundamental change in our lives. Quarantine forced us into our homes. It stopped us from having a lot of our social interactions, and it stopped us from doing things the way we normally did. Fun show of hands, did anybody have to learn a new technology during COVID, like Zoom, like Google, had to use FaceTime? Yeah. A lot of new things you had to learn, exactly. So this was a huge fundamental change, which then brings us to the super fun question. Did it hurt? The answer is yeah, kind of. So when we looked at a study that was conducted during COVID, they looked at both anxiety and depression to see what the impact that the pandemic was having. And they found that before the pandemic versus during, anxiety rates increased from people reporting high levels of anxiety from 5% to 20%. So in other words, a 4% increase. Depression was a little less intense, with only 2 times the amount of depression being reported. But the point of the matter is, this had a fundamental effect on us and how we are feeling and how we are doing. And we're going to keep experiencing these effects as we go on. And that brings us to the first topic, successful aging. So Julia mentioned this a bit, but this is something I tend to get asked a lot. Whenever I mention my type of research, any older adults in my life always ask, like, what's the trick? How do I age good? How do I keep my cognition well? And unfortunately, it's not really an easy answer. It's not a clean answer. I wish I could tell you, oh, just do X, and you're perfect for the rest of your life. It's not really how our research works, unfortunately. We know it's a combination of factors. We know there's socio-demographic things, so like household income has an effect. Occupation, if you have a really physically laborious job for most of your life, there might be more long-term effects of that. Education, early life education seems to have a pretty solid effect on successful aging. You can tell this is an American image because they said health insurance, but access to healthcare is huge. You also have, your lifestyle. Do you smoke? Do you have a healthy diet? Do you have physical activity? What's your quality of sleep? All of those things together impact. And this kind of breaks down into 3 categories. We have your cognitive and physical function. We have your absence of chronic disease and disability, and we have engagement with life. So engagement with life is a little vague, but it tends to be defined as a lack of limited social engagements. So in other words, do you have a lot of social contact? Do you have a lot of social engagements? And that seems to be very important, and it's what I'm going to be talking about today. So when we talk about socialization and social engagement, 2 terms tend to show up a lot, and they're often used interchangeably. We have social isolation and loneliness. And while they're related, they are not the same. So social isolation is a limited number of social relationships. It's objective, it's observable, and it's measurable. I can ask you, how many friends do you have? That's measurable. Loneliness is a distressing feeling of separation or being alone, an unpleasant feeling that social relationships are lacking. It's subjective and self-reported. This is very personal. This is based off of the quality of your relationships. And because there's a connection between the two, if you experience more social isolation, like what happened during the pandemic, typically you will also experience more loneliness. But if we increase your social contact and have you in a whole room of people, that doesn't necessarily mean you'll suddenly stop feeling as lonely, which is why we have to talk about loneliness and its fun connection with the pandemic. We're back to it again. So this was a longitudinal data study. So Julia had mentioned longitudinal studies. They're very exciting. We can look at a population over a prolonged period of time and look at changes. And this study happened to happen well before and during the COVID pandemic. And as you can see here, so we have 2 age groups. We have 65 to 74 and 75 to 84, of both men and women. And as you can see, for the most part, 2011 to 2015 and 2015 to 2018 is kind of about the same with reported loneliness. But in 2020, it skyrockets. You can see a significant amount. So while we're on the other side, and I'll put that in huge quotation marks, of the pandemic, we're no longer in quarantine, we're no longer experiencing that isolation, there are some prolonged effects. A lot of things changed during the pandemic. I know personally certain activities or events that I was regularly a part of simply no longer exist. Or they exist, but I'm no longer participating in them because I stopped for 3 years. So because of that, that brings us to our very fun conversation about loneliness. And my animations don't work here, so I gave away the answer. But does it matter that you're lonely? Because I already said that it's personal, it's subjective, so does it matter that you're experiencing loneliness? And unfortunately, yes. In regards to the cognitive effects of it, they found increased feelings of loneliness have been linked to decreases in cognition, like your memory, across multiple studies. Meaning multiple studies have found the same results, that increased loneliness is connected to a decrease in cognition. Likewise, increased reports of loneliness have been associated with increased Alzheimer's disease symptoms and clinical dementia. So that doesn't seem good at all. And it's not just cognitive effects. There's a lot of biology and body effects too. So in this fun infographic, it's a little small, so I'll read it. 32% have an increased risk of stroke with isolation and loneliness, a 29% increased risk of coronary heart disease, 25% increased risk of cancer mortality, 50% increased risk of developing dementia, 59% increased risk of functional decline, and a 45% increased risk of death. So that is not a fun presentation, and I'm very sorry. This was very depressing. But the point of the matter is we need to take this seriously. Loneliness is subjective, it's personal, but it has quantifiable effects, which means we need to talk about it. We need to talk about ways to address it. But let's talk about who's at risk first. Now, I will preface this a little bit with a little additional information. So I'm going to talk about who's on average at risk. We're going to look at studies that have compared different groups and said, ooh, this group tends to have higher loneliness than the other. But this does not mean that if you don't fit within that group that you're not going to be lonely, and that if you do fit into that group, they're always going to be lonely, or that you're guaranteed to become lonely. Just overall averages, but it is important to acknowledge who's at risk and to think about that. So, an estimated 1 in 5 older adults experienced loneliness in 2019 and 2020. That is a very high number. They also found that women were significantly more likely than men to be lonely, and that those who experienced barriers in social participation, living with multi-morbidity, were at a higher risk of loneliness. There's different debates as to why those two exist and why that definition is there. Experiencing those barriers of social participation makes sense. If it's harder to get out, it's harder to participate, you're going to be more lonely. Women was a little bit more hotly debated, but one of the theories that came up is as women are predominantly the caregivers in a lot of family units, during the COVID-19 pandemic when this data was collected, women increased their burden of caregiving and had to do a lot more, and maybe that was related to why they were feeling so lonely. We also have immigration status. So they found that immigrants were at a higher risk of loneliness than those born in Canada. And that also does make a lot of sense. If you immigrate to a new country, you have to cut ties with a lot of social connections. Friends, family, you leave a lot of people behind. This also was connected to gender, where men experienced, both European and non-European origin immigrants experienced higher levels of loneliness, as opposed, interesting to women, where this effect was only found with those of European origin. There you go. So we also have a study here that I want to talk about. So this study, and I know there's results on the page, but I'm going to tell you about it first. So this study was done in Toronto. So this study was conducted by one of our lovely PhD students who unfortunately wasn't able to be here today. Her name is Catherine Bolton, and this was her master's thesis. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, she looked at a variety of factors of Toronto older adults. She also put the study online, so we have a couple different communities in there. But across the board, she looked at a bunch of different factors and compared them. And she found that in the sample, older adults aged 70 to 75 had statistically lower levels of loneliness than those 60 to 64. She found that those living with one other person had statistically lower levels of loneliness than those living alone. That those reporting better health had lower loneliness than those with poorer health. And that those with a high school diploma or less had lower levels of loneliness than those compared with stuck on my words, to those with a post-secondary education. And this might be a little frustrating to hear, because these are not things that you can easily change about yourself. If you want to change your age, you've got to wait a couple years. I think the only easiest one is the living with another person one, but the rest of them is a little frustrating. So what other information can I give you? Well, in the exact same sample, we looked at coping strategies. And they asked these individuals who were reporting these levels of loneliness to report what types of coping strategies they were using. And I'll explain what those mean in a minute. But they found that those with approach-based strategies are associated with a decrease in loneliness, and those with avoidance-based strategies were associated with an increase of loneliness. So what does that mean? This typically looks at how you deal with situations and problems. If you typically use approach-based strategies, these are involved with when you see problems, you try to find solutions. You have someone close to you that you confide in. When you experience negative emotions, you speak about them. Avoidance-based coping strategies tend to involve withdrawing from other people in extreme situations, distracting yourself from problems. And those, again, and it makes sense, if you're avoiding things, if you're pulling away from people, you're going to experience higher loneliness. But what other things can you do? Well, one of the ways to handle this is to try to connect to more people and to do more things. So consider your interests, and what do you like to do? Go to in-person or online events. And I realize a little bit here, I am preaching to the choir. I am talking to a full room of older adults who are doing just that. You guys went to an event. There's lovely people online, I am sure, I've been told, who are coming to events. You're doing things, and that's fantastic. They actually found in a study that when they asked older adults, 80% reported having a frequent social activity that they did. Now, the majority of these were with family and friends, but they have found that older adults are getting out there. You guys are doing things, and that is fantastic. That is how we address this loneliness. But they also found that increasing activities also decreases loneliness. So doing more, getting out more, doing more things. So this is where you want to to reach out to others. Again, that very scary statistic of 1 in 5 older adults experience loneliness, which means even if you yourself don't feel particularly lonely, there might be someone else in your social circle who does. And also utilize your community. I don't know if everyone here lives in the GTA, but at the very least, you guys have connections to the GTA, and it is fantastic. This is a huge city with lots of events and activities and things in place that make it easier to go places and to do things. So make sure to seek them out. Which then brings us to the question, all right, Mariah, that was a good talk. Where's the evidence? I got you. So this was a meta-analysis that was conducted that looked at different types of activities with older adults and how that affected loneliness. Now, there was a lot of results in here, but one of the interesting things is what seemed to be quite effective against loneliness was regular meetings with groups. Now, this wasn't specifically activities. It was more for what they called treatments, which is really vague. But it tended to be something that you got together with a group and performed a very specific thing with, like mindfulness training. You were learning together, you were performing together, and you were doing this more than once, a recurrent meeting. We also have group exercises. So this one in the literature was a little bit, it wasn't as consistent as others. I'll get to that in a minute. But they did find that getting together with a group and exercising, getting your body moving was quite effective. And one, internet training. Now this doesn't necessarily mean internet events. They mean physically going, learning something new, learning how to use new technology was quite effective at reducing that loneliness. Which brings us to the question, a lot of these I just mentioned involved learning. And that seems to be the key. They actually cross-referenced activities versus treatments and training, and they found that learning opportunities tended to be better for loneliness than just straight activities. And one of the reasons why they think that might be is because when you're participating in a learning activity, you're engaging more. You're trying to learn, you're absorbing the information, maybe you're gonna ask questions. We should have time at the end of this talk for some questions. Maybe you're engaging with the person beside you, you're commenting, you're engaging more. Where activities, you could participate very passively. So there seems to be, in the literature, a bit of a preference towards learning, teaching, growing with others, as opposed to just going to activity. Now, this doesn't mean don't go to activities. You can go to activities. Activities and other research, like I said, increased activities, decreased loneliness. We have seen both. But it's important to keep in mind when you're choosing things, what works. Which brings me to this fun slide. Interventions are not one size fits all. One of the trickier bits with this literature is the fact that it's not particularly consistent between people with what works, because fundamentally, loneliness is very personal. It's subjective. We have to ask you to self-report. And because of that, what will work for you to reduce your loneliness might not work for someone else, and vice versa. So take a look at your interests, take a look at what you do, and think of fun things that you'd want to do to interact with others to increase the quality of those social connections. Now, I found this fun slide. I have not participated, unfortunately. I don't meet the group demographics, but I thought this was fundamentally adorable, and I wanted to talk about it. So I don't know if you guys are aware, but apparently there's a hiking club in Toronto. So this club, and I just found them online, so I haven't been able to, like I said, go, but apparently it costs $10 a year. They always meet at a TTC location that you can easily access, and you go on fun hikes. It's a recurrent activity. You'd be able to meet people and interact more. They said that they typically seek out green belt activities, but they do sometimes do community walks with other people. So this is one of the many activities and things that exist in the city that can get you out, talking, learning, and engaging with other people. So I'm going to hand off my talk here to Alicia. She's going to talk to you. You will see me again at the end, though. But thank you guys very much.
Thank you. Whoa, okay. So now let's take a very quick break, and maybe like we can stretch a little bit. And I know here loneliness does hurt, and we want to talk about how to combat, right? How to counteract the effects of loneliness and other things, and which might make us tired and make us seems like are not able to remember things. And I want you to take a deep breath, okay? Take a deep breath, bring your mind back to the present, and you probably turn to your neighbor and who sit beside you and say, really nice to meet you. Okay. Okay, so thank you. Thank you very much. And how does it feel? Yeah? Since we are here and we could be somehow connected, that reduces our loneliness. And now let's switch the gear, and I want to talk about something slightly different and about psychological well-being of Chinese older adults, and which are some data collected during the pandemic. And before that, I can tell you how pandemic might impact older adults. And this is based on a survey study conducted in America. So this is early in the pandemic, and they just hand out survey. It's an online survey, and with a large number of participants, and including younger adults, middle-aged, and older adults, and they check their mood and check how happy they are, how sad they are, and they have some positive emotions and negative emotions. And based on those graphs, and you can ignore if you don't understand, that's fine. And overall, compared to younger adults, older adults reported more positive emotions and fewer negative emotions. And also the intensity, also the same thing. Older adults feel like less intensive in terms of negative emotions, but more like has stronger positive emotions. And this is during the pandemic. So that's amazing. Our older adults thrived better than younger adults, right? And here is another study from my lab, and I will share a lot of data. Do bear with me. And this is another study from my lab, and we analyzed a large sample of American population, and we did a large longitudinal survey data, and forgive me about those graphs, and it's probably too small, but I want to identify two lines. The blue line you can see on the top, and that represents younger adults. And the broken purple line, that represents older adults aged 65 and above. Okay, so what can we conclude based on this graph? What did you see, like the blue line and the broken purple line? Yeah? So it seems like compared to our younger adults, and older adults reported lower in terms of a loneliness, in terms of a mental distress, and a perceived stress. Wow. And it seems like this is during the pandemic, and it seems like compared to younger adults, and older adults have a better mental health and better psychological well-being. Yeah, we're more adaptive. That's right, absolutely. And not only like they have a better mental health, and they also have a higher resilience. And see those purple line, and outperformed younger adults in terms of resilience and also coping, like adaptive coping. So it's really amazing, and to see like older adults have a better mental health and better psychological well-being, and also they are more resilient and has adaptive coping. And this is like based on American data, and for the data collected in my lab and with Chinese older immigrants, and we found something similar. And this is the interview study. We interviewed 60 adults, including younger adults, middle-aged adults, and older adults, and Chinese immigrants. And we found, compared to younger adults, older adults, and middle-aged adults, they reported more positive emotions during the pandemic, and they reported more adaptive coping. So for example, they are more likely to wear masks, and they are more likely to follow the public health guidelines, and compared to the younger adults. Okay, so it seems like the pictures are very positive. Hopefully this makes you happy. And we also did another survey that's in the late pandemic, and collected in 2022, and with 168 Chinese older immigrants, and we found perceived social support positively predict their psychological well-being, but loneliness harms, it hurts, has a negative, that's like, negative sign, negatively predict psychological well-being. What does this mean? So that means in people with more perceived social support, when you have something and you need someone to help you and you have someone available to help you, and that means you have social support, right? And you see you have friends, you have family members and who are available to help you, and that means you have that social support. So social support does matter. And if you feel lonely, more lonely you feel, and less likely you will have a good psychological well-being, okay? And this is also confirmed by another survey study, and this time we measured resilience, level of resilience and level of social support, and both show very strong positive prediction of psychological well-being. And that means people are more resilient and has more social support, and they are also likely to be better in terms of psychological well-being. So this comes to something, and so as a summary, and it seems like social support helps, resilience helps, but loneliness harms, right? Loneliness hurts. And what about discrimination, which is very specific to this minority population during the pandemic, and based on the stats, and it seems like anti-Asian hate crime and increase the skyrocket during the pandemic. And based on the data from the United States, and this is increased by 149%, if I get it correct, and that's a really dramatic increase. And the same thing in Canada, and anti-Asian crime and increased by over 700% in 2022 compared to the pre-pandemic, and which is really unfortunate. But how does this influence our mental health? And we did a survey study both at the early and the late pandemic, and we measured 2 questions in terms of discrimination. And the first is perception. So that is, do you perceive or do you think the pandemic might lead to the discrimination against the Chinese population? And you probably see agree, disagree, or neutral, okay? And another is experience the discrimination. So that question, have you ever personally experienced any type of a discrimination, okay? And we did 3 surveys, one in the 2020, 2021, 2022, and which is like across 3 years, and we found there's dramatic increase in perceived discrimination across 3 years during the pandemic. And also like experienced discrimination also increased from 2020 to 2022. So for perceived discrimination in 2022, approximately 60% of our sample reported perceived discrimination. So most alarmingly, and we also find discrimination hurts. So compared to those who disagree and there is discrimination, and those who said there is discrimination showed scored higher in terms of distress and loneliness. So that means their psychological well-being is worse when you perceive discrimination. And also for those experienced discrimination, and they also scored higher in terms of psychological distress and also loneliness. Okay, so what can we do then? And overall, and for the research we collected during the pandemic, and we found age matter, and older adults do better than younger adults, and they seems like they are more resilient, and they are better in terms of mental health, which is fantastic, right? And you have been doing such a fantastic job, right? And the second is social support, perceived social support, and resilience does matter. and support from others, and support from inner strength, and both are important. And discrimination and loneliness hurt. Okay? And then what can we do to promote active aging? And this is some intervention studies that we are doing. Our lab has done a lot of training studies with the purpose to promote active aging. And this is based on some past research results. And the first one I want to share with you, and ignore the graphs, but I just want to let you know the key message. And here's older adults practiced some online video game and it's supposed to exercise our brain. And here is like a neural research game, and you drive a race car, and you have to hold the car in the middle, but at the same time, you have to detect the different traffic light and press different buttons, and when you see different traffic light. Okay? And this is like a multitasking, dual task training. And compared to those who don't receive training, and people, older adults received the multitasking training, and they perform better in terms of multitasking after the training, and also this makes their brain works like younger adults' brain. Okay, so based on the graph here, and you can see the younger adults without training, and their brain activity pattern is the same as older adults after the training. So that means cognitive exercise does help us. Okay, so what about physical exercise? And a lot of you might have heard, you do those running, jogging, and aerobic exercise, and which helps with blood flow to your brain and increase your cognitive functions. But one recent research found in those age-appropriate and low-intensity exercise, like Tai Chi, which is whether very like Asian-specific exercise, like slow motion exercise, very age-appropriate, and older adults can feel safe and comfortable to do it. And they trained older adults, and with 12 weeks, 60 minutes exercise with this low-intensity physical exercise, and 5 days a week, that's kind of a full-time job. After 12 weeks, and I can tell you the exciting results compared to those who didn't receive the training, and those people received the training and has increased brain volume. And this increased brain volume is associated and with improved performance in memory and visual reproduction, right? I hope this convinces you to be physically active. And what else? And this one, and it's strikingly, and for older adults who participated in 1 year community, like a culture and art program, just the same thing as you do, right? Attending 50+ program or Life Institute, and just attending lectures and learning arts, and all this after 1 year, and improved their mental health, physical health, and also the social engagement. Is that amazing? Right? Seems like anything, as far as you do something, it will help. So in light of those research evidence, and my lab has been dedicated to develop a variety of different training programs and to promote active aging in older adults. So here we have done a lot in the past, but for the moment, and we also have 2 ongoing studies and with training and intervention. So the first one I will share with you, and that is the active aging training program, 3-arm, multi-domain, and it has different components, and some like physical, mental, or social, and also like some with resilience building lectures, and some with watching video clips, and some attending workshops about active aging. And we want to evaluate how effective is this multi-domain online active aging training program. So we delivered this training course over Zoom, and participants got homework after each session, and they can do on their own. Okay, so we finished. This is like we have like two parallel studies, and one with Chinese older adults, the other with white older adults for comparison purposes. And we just finished the first round of data collection with Chinese immigrant older adults, and we received very positive feedback. And then one older adult came to me and said, in the first session, I was so nervous, and I didn't know which button I press, and how to check my email, and how to got this link, and I was afraid to click any link you send me. But by the end of the training, and I am a pro. I can check my email, check my message, and I can click the link, and it seems like that's not scary anymore. So I'm so happy to hear about that. And one older adult said, we have a team of student volunteer RAs to deliver the session. I developed the course with another graduate student. And I have the students to deliver the course, and they received a lot of positive feedback. And one older adult told me, you know what? And my child didn't have time to be with me, to teach me step by step. And you guys are doing amazing, and thank you so much. So I think that speaks a lot, and it makes me feel all the effort I paid and put in this work, and it's worthwhile. Okay? So we have pre-test, post-test, and a 1 month follow-up to evaluate whether the training program is effective. And I hope I can share with you the data in the future. But for the moment, we are collecting the data. And to participate, you can get this from my table. And to participate, here's eligibility criteria. And you can take a screenshot, and you can scan the code. And if you are eligible, you are interested, and you can also email us if you have any questions. You can check up from our project website as well, and it's just take a screenshot or grab a flyer from my table, and you are welcome to participate. So the second intervention program is the audio training program, and we train older adults through music or audiobooks and following similar schedule, and this is also the recruiting participants. And we have a flyer up here, we have inclusion criteria, and if you're interested in some audio training, but for this project, there are 3 sessions in person, and you have to come in the lab and to do the assessment sessions. But the training is remote, and you will get a special iPad, and we will upload whatever the training materials, and you have to listen every day or 4 days a week for 4 weeks. Okay? And here I want to pass it to Mariah to tell you what she is doing.
There you go, I'm back again, I told you. Here to plug my own research. So if you guys visited our table and you filled out that long booklet questionnaire with all those questions, that means you've been added to our lab-based database, and if you're eligible for any of these studies, we will contact you. But if you're still interested or you're really excited, feel free to grab the flyers, or you can email us directly and just be like, hey, I want to participate. So what I do is a little different than what I talked to you guys today. And by a little, I do mean a lot. So I mostly research memory. So what I look at is differences in memory between older adults and younger adults in order to better understand how memory changes during aging. What's also super fun about my research is I will be using an eye tracker, which means when you sit at my table, I will have a little machine that will track your eyes throughout the memory process and throughout the memory project to better understand how your eye moves during memorization, which is going to be super fun and exciting. And on the topic of interventions, I have a variety of resources. I do recommend taking a picture if you want them. So this is kind of going back to the loneliness discussion, is there's a lot of resources out there of things that you can do in this city that are fun, are ways to connect with others. So the top one there, the Toronto Intergenerational Partnerships and Community, what they pride themselves with is they connect different age groups of people, and they bring them together to share knowledge, to have connections, to socialize. So that's a great way of interacting with others, and also other age groups. You have the Toronto Council on Aging. They have several Zoom sessions, Zoom videos, things to learn, to engage in, to participate in. The Toronto Public Library, I love the library. If you do not have a library card, I highly recommend it. All you need to do is to prove that you live within the GTA. I believe my first library card I got with just a birthday card my mother sent me. It's not tricky to get it, and they have a lot of resources. Not only do they have multiple sessions and events, even this month they have several recurrent sessions, so they continuously come back, as well as singular events. They have training sessions, they have events. I think they had a poetry and creativity night, lots of things going on. They also have something that's called MAP, which isn't specific to older adults, it's for the whole community, where Toronto releases a certain amount of free passes to museums and events. Ripley's Aquarium, CN Tower are all included. They're trickier to get a hold of because those are high-ticket items, but there are ways to engage and to do fun things in the city. SeniorToronto.ca is a resource with a lot of information. I really do recommend checking them out. They categorize a lot of things to do in this city. They also have a whole collection of what museums and events, when their free stuff is, what specific days and nights that you should go to go enjoy the free stuff. So I recommend checking out, wonderful resource. We also have the City of Toronto Recreations. This is general information about the city, events, things going on, what you can do, as well as Volunteer Toronto. If you want to volunteer, get more involved in your community, they can connect you to certain volunteer opportunities. So in general conclusion of our study, the pandemic had a pretty big effect on us. Mental health declined, and people felt more lonely. Certain groups are more at risk of loneliness, such as those aged 60 to 64, those living alone, women, immigrants, etc. But there's many ways to reduce loneliness, such as training, group exercises. There's ways for us to address this. We also talked about psychological well-being of Chinese older adults, age matters, social support and resilience helps, and loneliness and discrimination hurts. There's also interventions and research that we do, and hopefully that makes you feel a little more in control of things. Just a quick shout out to our funding. We've presented a lot of research that we've done today. We could not do this without our funding. We have funding from a variety of sources, and it is immensely important for us to do what we do. We need this funding. And a picture of our team. You only saw 2 of us today, but we are quite a formidable lab. We have many, many members. You saw some of us today at the table. Here's some more faces of our many people who are involved. And thank you all very much for listening to this talk in the afternoon. We appreciate you all immensely. And then.
Thank you very much. Keisha and Mariah. Thank you. We are now going to take a break and a stretch, and we will. Does anybody have any questions? I'm sorry about that. It's okay. We do have some time. We have a little bit of time, then we're going to take a 15-minute break and come back for an exciting finale to the day.
Yeah, here.
So thank you so much for your presentations and the case studies specific to COVID-19. So the last slide shows that the impact of the pandemic, that is the mental health decline during the pandemic, and the pandemic made older adults more lonely. So the lockdown is about 2 to 3 years. So now after this lockdown, is that impact permanent or is it transient?
Grab that back. So for the folks at home, because I know they can't hear this microphone, I'll just summarize and repeat. The question was, are these impacts of loneliness from the pandemic constant? Are there going to be evolutions of it? I would say that none of this is constant. A lot of these effects of the loneliness were definitely related to the fact that we were all trapped in our homes. I think a bigger concern is over the fact of patterns sometimes get stuck in your ways. So if you got very used to stopping your socialization, stopping going out, it's sometimes more difficult to get back into that and get more involved in events, and that is going to prolong those effects of loneliness. I don't know if there's...
That's right. That's right, and sometimes tough situations and it could help us to build resilience. It's like, could be crisis, could be its opportunity, right? And I think I agree with Mariah, and it doesn't have to last long, and that's why we do all those research, and we want to build connections, and we want you to be active and through Zoom or in person, and this will certainly and make it better. I don't have the, quite, it's not like lasting if you don't keep the same style. Does that answer your question? Yeah, I see a hand up there. And
the references
resources?
or like the resources. This one? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you can take a photo and, yeah. So any other, yeah, sure. Okay, so thank you very much. I think the question is why we have more ladies attending the events relative to gentlemen, right? And I think that's not only like specific to this event, and also like in all the workshops and during the pandemic. And I did a lot of workshops at the community, either Zoom or in person, and it's just more. It's the same, yeah. Also, like research participation, the same, yeah. And
the older men that come here have a female in our system.
Sorry, I don't follow that question, but I think it's like there's a gender differences in terms of how to relax and how and maybe like a gentleman prefer to stay alone and to go over their whatever the challenge they have, and they don't want to be connected. But for females and the social support, that's a big thing. Yeah. Wow. There are more women because we are mostly caregivers. We live longer and caregiver, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Discrimination? Yeah, and well, those intervention studies, and we don't, it's discrimination, that's not a target outcome. But for the moment, and we don't have like a longitudinal study to track, whether the discrimination might change, but I'm pretty sure in the national survey data, and we should have something available post-pandemic. But based on the data available in my study, and so there's a change, continuous increase in discrimination from the first year to the third year of the pandemic. Yeah, thank you. Women live longer than men. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's right, yeah. Mm-hmm. So women survived, right, and longer, and that's probably also. Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah. Okay, so I think we're. Oh, yeah, sure. Thank you.
The great research that you have had in COVID time or something like that, but I would say that there are people of disabilities, invisible disabilities. They cannot express what they are feeling, lonely or they are ignored. And second thing, housing. Housing is for the seniors. They are very much uncontrolled situation. So social housing, RTI housing. So I have a case and I have compiled all information right from the beginning from where they land. If you want to see that information and compile in your study, I would love to give you all information which I collected and compiled. And now I'm looking for some research paper to be given by the competent authorities like you. So I have a hearing now, so I have gone through a lot personal experience and experience.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for waiting to share. And yeah, okay, so
Thank you very much.
thanks.
How to contact them? You can give me.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much. I will give it back to
So
Kathy.
back at 3:30 to have Becoming is Do It. And it's going to be a very exciting presentation. Thank you, Alicia and Mariah.
Time